Shashi, welcome to Edinburgh. It's
Thank
wonderful to have you here, and I know you've got a very busy day today, but on behalf of the Age of Scotland Institute, I welcome you.
Thank you. Good to be with you and really good to be in Edinburgh.
Well, particularly too, since our mission is to educate and inspire people of Scotland, future leaders, tomorrow's leaders, to understand better the broad scope of, obviously, Asia, and within it the importance of India. And I wonder if we could just sort of start off our talk together today by asking you about your book on the Empire and how it seems to have emerged from the debate that you had and won at Oxford University.
That's right. People are used to people making speeches about their books, but here I wrote a book about a speech. What happened was that I participated in a debate at the Oxford Union, which was on the theme that the students chose, Britain owes reparations to her former colonies.
Yes.
I really wasn't much of a reparations man myself, feeling, I think, justifiably that any sum of money that could be payable would not be a credible amount, because how do you put a value or quantify in financial terms, enormous damage done by centuries of colonial depredation. But then I said a payable sum would not be credible, a credible sum would not be payable, so why bother going down that route?
Yes.
Instead, I used the speech to sort of do a balance sheet, as it were, of colonial damage in India. And when this was posted on YouTube some weeks later, it surprisingly went viral and millions of people watched it. With the result that my publishers called and said, you need to write a book on this. I said, for God's sake, everyone knows this already. To which his answer was, no, they don't, because if they did, your speech wouldn't have gone viral. Which seemed to be irrefutable logic, so here's the book.
Excellent. Now, were you surprised by the reaction to your book?
Yes. Yes, because, I had studied history in school and college, moved on from the subject, tried to continue reading about it, and I assumed that what I was saying were things that, as the Americans would call it, nationalism 101. This is some of the basic foundational arguments of the Indian freedom struggle. But the truth is they've been forgotten. And they've been forgotten perhaps because people thought they didn't matter anymore, since it's now been 70 years since independence, and partly perhaps because they weren't paying attention in intellectual class, I don't know. But it has widely raised a sense of unfamiliar knowledge having dawned on people, and that did surprise me. I found myself saying to young people in India all the time, if you don't know where you've come from, how will you appreciate where you're going?
Yes.
You really do need to have a sense of what your country's past, recent past at any rate, was all about.
And the same could be true, I suppose, of what British people, and here we are Scottish people, are taught in schools, raised on G.A. Henty and Kipling and other things like that. There isn't a knowledge of the things that you have written about in your book.
I'm afraid not. And in fact, you mentioned people like Henty, who I fear is no longer very much read, but certainly all these gauzy, romanticized television soap operas extolling the glories of the British Raj have painted a very false picture of what the real experience of the Raj was like for those at the receiving end, as it were, of the stout British boots, to quote the name of an ode published in Punch magazine in the 19th century. The fact is that the stout British boot weighed rather heavily on the rest of us, and our experience, or the experience of the victims, is simply not known.
As you've spoken earlier today, people were asking questions about why it was that the Indian population and its leaders didn't unite against British, well, first of all, the East India Company and then British national rule. Why is that?
Well, the British were lucky with their timing. They came in as the Mughal Empire was disintegrating. There was a couple of attacks on the empire that sort of dealt it its death blows. The former governors of the provinces had become de facto semi-independent potentates, and they could be picked off one by one. So it wasn't as if Britain conquered the might of the Mughal Empire. It conquered it in bits and pieces and expanded over. It did have, of course, very agile and superior military methods, perhaps not technology or weaponry, which were more or less the same on both sides, but the way in which it was deployed was better under the Brits. And then there was a great deal of Indian complicity. First of all, there was betrayal and venality and cupidity within each of these various Indian forces, and secondly, there was undoubtedly a lot of cooperation with the Brits by various Indians who personally stood to benefit from British rule.
As we were talking earlier today, we didn't get on to famines. We didn't really get on to the manipulation of the economy, both of which were connected, of course. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, the famine story is a rather sad one because it really, there have been droughts in the past, but people have rallied around and helped the victims.
Yes.
And famine deaths, if any, were very, very few and far between in the past. But the Brits, you see, approached famines, whether in India or in Ireland or anywhere else, with a set of principles.
Yes.
They were very much people who did things by the book, as it were.
Sure.
And so they said, number one, thou shalt not give charity, because charity encourages idleness. Remember the workhouses of Charles Dickens' day?
Yes,
So this was very much a deeply entrenched British view. Don't give charity. Secondly, the laws of the market must prevail.
Yes.
If you want to buy grain from places where there isn't enough of it because of a drought, but you need the grain for the bread baskets of London, you go ahead and buy it, drive the prices up beyond the reach of the starving, but it doesn't matter, that's the laws of the market. Adam Smith would have approved.
Yes.
Or so they thought. Number three, Malthusian principles. If the land can't sustain the population that's trying to live off it, then people must die.
Yep.
That was the third principle. And the fourth was Victorian fiscal prudence. Thou shalt not spend money thou hast not budgeted for, and thou shalt not budget for a famine.
Yep.
So the result was a systematic series of decisions made in successive famines, which cost lives unnecessarily, and which were enforced with utter cruelty. I recount one incident I came across in the Orissa famine of the 1860s, 1866, in which a Mr. McMinn, who out of the kindness of his heart wanted to give some food to a starving man, was ordered by the British on pain of deportation to stop doing so. So this kind of thing was just unfortunately very, very nasty. And as England itself became more enlightened in the later part of the 19th century and the British public started demanding more decent behavior, the government of the British government in India very reluctantly authorized workhouses, work camps.
Yes.
But as has been demonstrated by British researchers, the rations they provided to these poor souls working to keep body and soul together were lower than the rations that Hitler gave the inmates of the Buchenwald concentration camp before sending them off to be gassed. So it really was quite inhumane.
Tell me, with all this having happened as it has, Indian attitudes towards the British now, the question of, I think you might have said, the extent to which an apology should be given, as almost a precursor to be able to engage going forward in a profitable and meaningful future together.
Now, I do want to keep the past separate from the present, honestly. I think that, as I said during our talk today, an apology would be a very fine thing to do. Others have done it, notably Willy Brandt in Poland, Justin Trudeau in the Canadian Parliament, to the people of India.
Yes.
So the fact that the British have never apologised is a shame, at least for the atrocities, at least, where even objective British historians will concede that an apology is due.
Yes.
It seems to me that that would be a good thing, but it should not be a precondition or a precursor, because I do believe we have to look beyond the past. I mean, today, India and Britain are economies of roughly the same size. Their relationship is that between two sovereign equal countries.
Yes, yes.
I don't need to approach the British with a chip on my shoulder, and I certainly should not, I think, impose such a precondition. At the same time, as we've talked earlier about the importance of history, India is a forgive and forget culture.
Yes.
Though in my book I've been basically arguing to Indians, forgive but don't forget.
Yes.
Still, it's a bit shame-making, to put it mildly, that Britain has forgotten so quickly. That you can do A-levels in history in this country without learning a line of colonial history. There's a whole contribution to building up the Britain of today that was made by the colonies, by the wealth of the colonies and the labour of the colonies, which is now completely forgotten, obscured or brushed under the carpet. And I think for all of these reasons, it behoves, it would be good for Britain, let's put it that way, if Britain woke up and took a look at its own history whole, rather than for India to sit around saying, you need to apologise. I say, as an individual Indian, it would be good for you if you did indeed apologise.
But whatever the readers of your books may say, or some of your critics, what you have given us is a very strong wake-up call to understand what has happened in the past, to take a deep breath and move forward together in the future. And as I said at the beginning, since our role here is to educate and inspire tomorrow's leaders in Scotland, I think your talk and your book have gone a very long way towards doing that. So, Shashi, thank you again very much for for all that you've said today.
Thank you, Roddy. I have a slightly mischievous passage in the book in which I talk about how Scotland, before the Act of Union,
Yes.
failed at its own attempts at colonization in Central America and so on.
The Darien
Panama,
scheme.
Darien, all of
Yes.
that. And then by joining England in the Union,
Yes.
India was opened up to the Scots.
Right.
And though Scotland was, I think, something like 7% of the population of Britain at the time, it was about 20% of the British presence in India. Scots did very well, the jute factories of Dundee and all of that. And the result was that it seems to me, and this is the mischievous part, that when India left, the bonds of the Union began to fray.
You may well be right. Thank you.
Anyway, good to be here in
Well,
Scotland with you. Thank
thanks
you.
a lot. Thank you.